Welcome back to Central Valley Talk. Our show is Briggs on Books. We're an international talk show where I get to talk to authors from all over the world about their books, about their adventures, about their ideas. So half the day I read books, the other half of the day I talk to authors over these Zoom calls. And there's so many exciting, I'm very excited about this. So let me just say, The American Zone, a novel of Panama. I love to study the Panama Canal and that whole era, and what a tremendous feat that was to get that thing built. I'm looking for the author. There he is, Howard Shrier. Welcome, Howard.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Tell our viewers where you're located.
I'm actually in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico,
Wow.
where I was part of the faculty at a wonderful writers' conference they have here every year. This was the 20th anniversary, and I taught creative writing aspects to some great people.
Nice.
And we're just spending a few extra days here before I head back to snowy Toronto.
Oh my goodness! Be
Yes.
careful how you land that plane there when you get
I
there.
know, yes.
Are you? Is it sunny where you are now? Is it warm?
Very, very beautiful here.
Yeah, in Mexico. That's
Yes.
nice. By the way, I could go on and on about the Panama Canal Zone and the building of the thing, but you're telling a story. This is a novel that describes some characters that go do that. Tell our viewers about the book. Here's the cover.
So it's a novel about a 6-month period in 1906, which was when the American effort was just first really starting to get going. The first year or two, not much got done. They hired a chief engineer named John Wallace, who was not up to the job. He was so petrified of yellow fever that he brought a metal coffin for himself and one for his wife. He was sure that he was going to die. After a year, he just said, "That's it, I've had it." And Teddy Roosevelt and William Taft drafted John Frank Stevens to become chief engineer. He was America's greatest railroad builder. He had found the first pass through the Rocky Mountains. He had laid more track than anybody in the history of the country. And he said, "This is a railroad problem. We've got to, dig and blast and haul away that rock before it turns into mudslides and comes down on us." And he rebuilt the Panama Railway, which had fallen into disrepair, and just an ingenious system of rail cars to transport people and rock. But it was also the deadliest year. I interviewed a terrific historian at the University of Maryland, and I said, this is a 10-year thing. She said, narrow it down. And I asked her if there was like 1 year I was going to focus on, what should it be? And she said 1906. Yellow fever was just kind of coming to an end, but it was still a tremendously dangerous place to live and work. And people died by the thousands every year, whether from disease, accidents, suicide, different things. And so I focus on 1906, culminating in Teddy Roosevelt's visit to Panama in November.
Yeah, now, you chose two characters to tell this story through. Tell us about the characters and their diversity.
Well, I discovered in my research that it was a tremendously racist system that they had, kind of inherited from the Panama Railway. There were two payrolls, gold and silver. If you were a white American, a draftsman, an engineer, or a machinist, you got paid $2 a day in gold, which for 1906 was, a very handsome salary. You got free housing, education if you had kids, health care, sick days, 6 weeks of paid vacation out of the tropics. You got the kind of benefits even Scandinavia probably doesn't have today. On the other hand, if you were a black worker from the West Indies, where most of them came from Barbados, or even a European from a southern country, you were on the silver payroll. You got paid $1 a day in silver, not gold. Your benefits and accommodations were nowhere near what the white workers got. So I eventually developed two protagonists. One is a white American who leaves San Francisco after the terrible earthquake that destroyed the city in April of '06, and a young black man from Barbados. They arrive in Panama on the same day, but on opposite coasts, one in Panama City, one in Colón. And because one is white and one is black, the opportunities and their destinies could not be more different.
Amazing. Now,
Yes.
Howard, this is not your first book, is it?
Oh, no. It's my seventh book of fiction. I'm best known, certainly in Canada, for a series of crime novels featuring a Toronto investigator who goes to different places in each book to solve his cases: Buffalo, Boston, Chicago, and Montreal. I've also written a standalone novel about the Witness Protection Program in the States and a book of crime stories.
Well, they also, I'm always interested to ask an author about his research, and certainly all those books took a lot of research. But tell us about this book, The American Zone, and what kind of research it took you to do.
Well, it's kind of interesting. I had never given the Panama Canal 2 seconds of thought, but I love documentary films. Usually rock and roll documentaries and how this band or that band got together. And then one day I was looking for something to watch, and I stumbled upon a very good PBS documentary. I forget the exact title, but it was about building the canal. And it talked about the contributions made by Teddy Roosevelt and John Stevens, and also William Gorgas, the doctor who really, he didn't exactly discover, but he was one of the first to say that yellow fever was transmitted by mosquitoes, not by swamp gas, bad water, dirty bed sheets, or other myths. And as you said, the scope of the project, the fact that people could look at this mountain range, the Continental Divide, and say, we can get through it. It was astounding to me. And so I began to research. And the first book I bought was called The Path Between the Seas by the great historian David McCullough. Just a tremendous book. And anyone who wants to know about the Panama Canal should start with that. But from there, we have a great library system in Toronto. I just would go type Panama Canal into their search and come up with books. I amassed quite a collection of Panama books at home, starting with the railway, starting with the earliest history. I came across fascinating stories, and for 6 months I did nothing but research. I didn't write a word until I felt like I had a pretty good grasp on who my characters might be, what the timeline I would use, and then key scenes. And Mike, I started my career in journalism many years ago, and so if I liked a book, I would write to the author and say, "Can we do an interview? Can you tell me more?" You find out the most interesting things that way. One of the first books I read was called Silver People by Margarita Engel. And it was a very interesting book, very poetic. In the notes at the back, I found an allusion to the fact that there were anarchists in the canal zone because they were importing workers from Spain and Cuba. And I started thinking, Teddy Roosevelt's coming, anarchists. There's cases of dynamite everywhere, for blasting in the Culebra Cut. Research, and I just taught this class at the San Miguel conference, where I said to them, you never know what your plot might be until you do your research.
Nice.
And only then do you know, I've got to have a character like this. I've got to work this in. This is an amazing, scene. Roosevelt, by the way, when he came to Panama, was the first sitting U.S. president ever to leave the country.
Wow.
And it was a bit of a scandal. He's doing what? You can't do that. Well, try telling that to Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah.
So it was a huge deal. So there were just tons of research. And then as the story took shape, I could do more of what I would call spot research. Just fill in little bits and pieces. I read a memoir called Canal Zone Policeman 88 by a guy who had joined. They had their own police force, their own legal system, their own criminal code. So one of my characters as a crime writer, I created a Canal Zone police officer.
Nice.
Wouldn't have known that until I had done the research.
Yeah. I think that this. First of all, it sounds amazing because you tell this story, but there's all these facts in there as well.
Oh yes,
Historical facts. I mean, who knew the whole railroad thing that you told us? I find that the most fascinating. That they knew who to find and who to get the right engineer, and the engineer says this is a railroad project. And that was amazing.
Yeah.
I had not read that.
And
part.
had he not really come to that, I don't know that it ever would have gotten built, because the French, tried for about 5 years and then went bankrupt. But they would dig and blast, and then they would have these torrential rains, of course, and turn into mudslides that would come down and wipe out all the progress they'd made, and some of the workers and some of the material. John Stevens said, "I need bigger locomotives." And they designed them 5 times bigger than what the French had. He designed the biggest steam shovels ever built, I believe, in Milwaukee. And he just had such a great engineer's mind that he could apply his knowledge of railroads and other systems to the problem. And even though he didn't stay, he was a very thin-skinned guy, and he was easily insulted. And at one point he wrote to Roosevelt and said, this is just a job to me and I could make more money elsewhere. Yeah. Roosevelt didn't like that and said, you know what, you're out. Yeah. And the third and final engineer was an army man who couldn't quit, named George Gettles. And he saw it through, but it never would have been done without Stevens' vision and plan.
It's interesting, projects like this, or going to the moon, the innovation that develops around it. That they invented the bigger locomotives and steam shovels and things like that.
Yeah, the innovation, but also the will. You needed a president like Roosevelt who said, we're getting this done, and the government's paying for it. We're not raising money through bonds or anything like that. He was very, very insistent there would be no corruption, no padding. Every expense had to go through New York, through the Canal Commission. They ran a very, very tight ship. But you wonder sometimes today, does America or other countries for that matter, do they still have the will to get these great projects done?
Yeah. Well, this is a very timely book. Like you said, you hadn't paid much attention to Panama Canal through the years, and now everybody said, what is this? We gave it away. What's going on? And
yes,
it's an interesting story, so fascinating story.
Yes.
Howard, I wish I could read all the books of all the authors I talked to, but this one, this will be in my stack very soon because I'm very fascinated by this. And I can tell your approach is going to be very entertaining for me and educational as well.
Well, I hope so. I'm a storyteller first and foremost. I'm not a historian, but the history that I include is accurate. I mean, I certainly did my utmost to check and double check, and I'm sure somebody reading it will go, wait a minute. But I think you'll learn a lot about the cost of the canal in human life, as well as dollars, and just the enormity of the project.
Yeah, that's great. Howard, we're at the end of our time, actually past our time. I couldn't stop. Any last thoughts for our viewers about this book or anything in the world you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, Panama's a great place to go to if you've never been there. I went on a research trip and I found it absolutely fascinating. And to go down the canal, that in itself is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. But I'm a new fan of historical fiction. My other novels were contemporary, and whatever dragged me into this one, I'm pretty sure my next book will be historical fiction as well.
That is great. Howard, I'd like you to come back on the show anytime you want. A lot of authors come every month or so, and we'd be happy to have you anytime.
Love to be back, Mike. Thank you.
Especially maybe after I read the book, we could have you back.
All right.
All right. For our viewers, don't go anywhere because we're going to be back with more authors from somewhere in the world right after this.